You have the floor.
Thank you, board members. Earlier this year, you allowed us to engage with District Management Group to do an initiatives inventory to take a look at the academic return on investment on essentially all of the initiatives that we have across the district. Ms. Graber and I, we had heard about the work that had been done by District Management Group, seen some of their presentations at GFOA and GFOA, and found their work to be something that lined up with what we were seeking, which was kind of clear understanding about where we are with all of our initiatives across the district, and being able to kind of process and develop a process so then we can determine where we can find greater efficiency with the initiatives that we've got, where gaps exist, what the perceptions are, and then really adopt our own process on how we bring new initiatives on board and how we evaluate the effectiveness of those initiatives on an ongoing capacity. So we've been working with Simone and Lucy from DMG since the beginning of our contract, and so they've been working very closely with our district staff, with our principals, with our cabinet, and they're here to share a little bit about the work that they've accomplished. And then at the end, we'll talk a little bit about how we plan on moving the work forward from here.
Good afternoon, everyone. Great to see and meet all of you. My name is Simone Carpenter. I'm a director with District Management Group, and I'm excited to be here. We had a really energizing meeting with cabinet leaders earlier today, and I'm just really thrilled to be here with all of you talking about our work over the last few months with SDOC. I thought I would just introduce myself and our organization, have Lucy introduce herself, and then just go around and say our names and how long we've been on the board, and then we'll jump into things. So just a little bit about me. I started my career in the classroom. I was a middle school math interventionist in San Jose, California. I've done work in a number of different educational settings, including working for an ed tech company, working for a state Department of Education, and in my work at District Management Group over the last 8 years, I worked with about 100 school districts on exactly this. So helping districts think through, what do we have? Is it working? Is it a good use of our resources? And how do we move forward with it? And so that's what I'm excited to share with you, a lot of the work that we did here on that. I'll have Lucy introduce herself, and then we'll go from there.
Hi folks, my name is Lucy Niazova. I'm an associate with District Management Group, and my role is basically supporting Simone with all aspects of this project. So anything that you'll hear today about data collection, data analysis, that was my role for this. My background is in education policy and research, so I'm kind of the data person for our company, and I'm also a multilingual learner, so I try to bring that perspective into all aspects of my analysis and research that I do.
So just like quick introductions, you don't have to give too much, but your name, how long you've been on the Board of Education, and let's just say, because it's the last week of school, something that we love in the summertime. And you can go first.
I'll pass.
Bronson, no ma'am.
Paula Bronson.
No ma'am.
She's been a board member like me for a minute.
Okay.
And what can we say? My name is Betsaida Garcia.
Nice to meet you.
Summer camping.
Camping,
Oh,
me
yes.
too. I love camping.
Camp, that's nice. Tara Castillo, I've been on the board for 7 years. Something that I like about summer, I don't know. The pool's cool, so I'm excited about that. Yeah.
Heather Cahoon. I've been on the board since 2022, and I think I like the less crazy schedule that comes with summertime because I have 3 kids. So the fact that we're not worrying about school all summer long is kind of nice, but I'm always ready for them to go back when it comes time for August. You'll also
Makes you appreciate school a lot.
be happy to know we all have worked in the education field in some capacity or another. So we
Fantastic.
all know how, this job runs in that way.
Anthony Cook. We started together. I don't even think we're a year in. Yeah, we're not even a year in. But 21 years in education, from K-12, actually K through college, grad school. I did teach grad school. That's right.
Oh, yes.
Just tell your fun summer thing.
I'm
and
sorry.
let's get on.
I'm sorry.
We have to keep him up focused.
Sorry. That's yes. I'm still in pool is cool and not crazy schedule. 3 kids too. So
Yes. Great. Well, I make all of you talk first so that you feel comfortable, hopefully asking some questions and engaging in the content today. I just want to make it really explicit. I will pause and ask if you have questions or comments or reactions, but don't wait for the pause. If you have something on your mind, ask it. I'm someone who would prefer to be interrupted and have the question asked than have it be held and Dr. Shanoff get a bunch of calls later about what did that mean and things like that. So you all have the hard copy in front of you. There's also the presentation up on a lot of screens around. So we'll talk through it, but again, this is meant to be really a conversation this afternoon. So over the next hour, we'll provide an overview of what our partnership looked like with SDOC, kind of how we collected all this information, what information we collected, and then we'll share with you all some initial findings that are really district level findings on our initiative inventory. And as Dr. Shanoff said, we'll make sure we talk about what are the next steps from here, and because this inventory is only as good as it's used, so what's going to happen from here in how this will be used to make decisions around programming and initiatives here in the district. And just, you met Lucy and I about who we are, like who District Management Group is. Over the last 20 years, we've partnered with school districts coast to coast of all different shapes, sizes, locations, really working on our mission to create systemic improvement in public education by combining educational research-backed best practices and best practice management techniques. And you see on the right-hand side in the dark blue part of the slide, our logo, but really what this logo means and comes from is everything we do is first and foremost asking the question, what's best for students? How can we improve student outcomes? But in order to do that in a sustainable and lasting way, you also have to think about what's best for your teachers and your staff and your operations and what's best for your budget. And those 3 things have to work together to create systemic improvement. They can't work in contrast with one another. So everything we do is kind of on those three facets there. And in addition to Lucy and I, we had 2 other teammates who aren't here today to be here, but John Kim, our CEO and founder, he's also the Public Education Leadership Project co-chair at Harvard Business School and Grad School of Education. And then Talia Mercado, our senior associate on our team. So just in addition to Lucy and I, those 2 folks were involved in this work. And so now let's jump into what we did with Osceola. So we had 2 goals for our partnership with SDOC. The first of those is building this inventory that really establishes a common understanding across the district of what are all the many things that we're investing in and what are some key pieces of information about those many things, like who they're targeted towards, where they're implemented, how effective and efficient they are, and how much they cost. And then, as I said, the list is only part 1. Then the next piece is taking action using that list. So the second goal is kind of taking that academic return on investment lens to say where are there overlaps, where are there gaps, where are there challenges in data collection and systems for the district, and how can we take action on our programs and our systems to ultimately improve our effectiveness and our efficiency here in the district. A couple terms I want to define for you that you'll see a lot. So the first of those is academic return on investment. What do we mean when we say that? We mean the answer to a question, what works for which students at what cost? So if you break that down, if we have a specific program and we say what works, what that means is what are the outcomes associated with this program, and are we getting those outcomes? And that has to be really specific to the program or the initiative being implemented. For which students, this tells us, is a program or an initiative more effective for certain grade levels or student populations, or for students requiring, with specific learning gaps. So an example I often like to give here is often reading intervention programs are, for any student who's behind on literacy behind grade level. But some programs are really effective for kids who are right on the bubble and just need like a little push. And other programs are much more intensive, and they work better for students with like really severe learning gaps in specific areas. And that for which students tries to identify, are there some populations or groups of students that's more effective or less. And then at what cost? This might seem like the most straightforward, but we don't just mean the line item in a budget, because 80 to 90% of your budget is staff. And their time is the most valuable resource that exists. And so when we talk about at what cost, we don't just mean dollars, we also mean time and people. Like, what's the total investment we're making? And when you have that understanding of what works for which students at what cost, you can make really nuanced decisions about your programming. So often when districts hear we're doing this inventory, they get really nervous because they say we're going to make one of two decisions on every program. We're going to keep it or we're going to cut it. But it's much more nuanced than that, and should be much more nuanced than that. So you can make a lot of decisions. You can expand a program, say something's being piloted or only used in certain grade levels or schools, but you're seeing it's really effective. Can we try it out with more students? Keeping a program, you do that because it's effective, it's cost effective, let's stay the course. Segmenting and targeting, this is if you find that you have some programs that are really effective for certain populations, let's target them towards those populations and find something better for other students. Reducing programs, we often see this in a program that's very expensive but has some indication that it's successful. Can we figure out what are the pieces that make it successful and maybe reduce some of the other costs around it? And then fix a program. When we don't see results, I often ask the question, is this the right idea with poor execution or the wrong idea altogether? If it's the wrong idea altogether, we should eliminate the program. If it's the right idea with the wrong execution, we should fix execution. And so that's kind of some of the decisions you might make. The other terms I want to define for you as we talk about an initiative inventory is initiative inventory. So an inventory, this is exactly what it sounds like. An inventory is like a list of everything you have. If you think about a store's inventory, it's what are all the SKUs that they have and how much do they have of each of them and all the other pieces. So if we think about that in a district context, what we mean is a comprehensive list of all of the initiatives and programs with an understanding of the objectives, the data collected, relevant results, along with the fully loaded costs. So what are the time, the people, and the dollars we're investing? And how are these tied to our district strategy and student populations? And so by having this big list, you're able to take a real bird's eye view of what are all the things we're investing in and where might there be overinvestment, where might there be underinvestment, where do we need to improve our systems versus improve our programs, kind of a sense of how are we doing as a big health check-in. And when we talk about initiative, the last term I want to define, what we mean is everything on top of just your basic core programming outside of day-to-day operations. So how we define initiative is an investment in people, programs, or processes that is intended to meet a specific goal and that's outside of day-to-day operations. As we've been working with SDOC, we've been using a lot of different analogies for this, but the one I like most is frozen yogurt, because go to a frozen yogurt store, you get your yogurt, and then you add all the toppings, and this is all the toppings. What's everything? The frozen yogurt is your core classes. It's having one teacher for every 25 students in this grade level, and it's having one custodian for every however many square feet. But then you have kind of all the stuff that's on top of that, like the supplemental, intervention programs or coaches that support students. And an initiative is something important and critical and strategic, but it's on top of the kind of zero base, if you think about it that way, of how a district runs. So when we were working with departments to figure out what are your initiatives, we asked them, what are all the things in your department that you believe are strategic, like have a tie to a district strategy or team strategy, are purposeful, you have kind of a measure of how you would understand success. There's an investment in people, time, or dollars, and it has to be managed by the central office just in terms of data collection. Some examples of initiatives, a lot of mentorship programs. Oh yeah, thank you so much. Mentorship programs or summer camps, curricular, like your core math curriculum, not a initiative. That's just kind of how you do business. But anything on top of that core math curriculum, so professional learning related to math, or a supplemental software or a math coach, those would all be included as initiatives. Any questions on how we kind of defined that before we move forward? Okay, so those are the big terms to know. And the next thing to know is, how did we build this list? So we followed a distributed approach to doing this. So we started with aligning with Dr. Shanoff, Sarah, a couple other district leaders on that definition of an initiative and how we should go about collecting all this information to make sure it's comprehensive and accurate. And then a few months ago, we came out here and we met with all department leaders. So that's every person who runs a department across the organization. And we said to them, hey, here's a process for you to follow. Now you tell us some critical information about all of your different initiatives in your department. Our team, Lucy, Talia, myself, worked with each of those department leaders to iterate on that list to say, hey, I wouldn't include this or I would include that. I don't see anything that looks like this. I would have thought there would be something, to make sure we have kind of that first big list going. And then we wanted to say, from those who are most directly implementing it, what feedback do they have? So we went to principals. A little over a month ago, we met with all principals and gave them a list of initiatives that, based on what we got from central office, are likely to be happening at their school. And we asked them some questions about, are you implementing that initiative? How's it working? How important is it? And got that feedback from those who are directly implementing. And then we brought all of that together. Sorry, that skipped. We brought all of that together into a final list of initiatives and feedback on it. The next two slides are just what we asked for, so I'm not going to go in depth into them, but we asked department leaders for tons of information on their initiatives. So not just what is the initiative, but also what's its purpose, how much is it costing, all those pieces. And we asked principals a smaller amount of information, but we said, is this happening, yes or no? And then if it is happening, how important is it and how effective is it? And if it's not happening, would you want it? So we can get a sense of their perspectives. And then we also asked them, what else do you have that isn't on this list? So we could get a sense of where principals are supplementing what's being provided by the central office. All right. So that's kind of our process that we follow to gather all this information. What questions do y'all have about that process before we jump into what we found?
You say you met with every principal?
We joined
Or
a
just
principal
a-
meeting
Oh.
and we presented the work to them, and then we gave them about an hour in real time to fill out, because we know the principal has so many things on their plate that it's best to just say, do it here while we're here. So we gave them about an hour in their principal meeting to fill out the survey and provide feedback to us.
The programs that you're looking at, do they already provide feedback to the district? They don't?
No.
If it's working or if they're seeing the growth, they don't provide that?
I mean, maybe in pockets they would, but
Well, I
It's
know
not,
that she's-
it's not operationalized.
in a systematic way.
Because I know that, are you referring to the fact that in our meetings when we're renewing, you have been including ROI?
I thought that
in
data
those
was
already.
included. It's not?
So so that's one piece of it. So we will include, like increases in whatever that's meant to, whatever that's meant to fix. We'll include that data if that data is available. That won't necessarily include all data points around that particular tool, only what we can collect. But we don't have a process by which we get, say, perceptions about the usability. We don't always pull in all of the usage data as well. We'll get the results, and usually, because that's the most important piece, but we won't always pull in some of the other things that are important, especially when we start looking at performance-based contracts and things that we're going to be looking for in performance-based contracts, which would be usage rates. We would want kind of ease of use. We would want to be able to kind of score all of that. The idea behind this is for us to actually give you a much more well-developed report card around certain things when we come back for renewals.
Performance-based, like iReady? Like what are we talking about?
No, performance-based contracts would be if a product says that it's going to do something.
Like
Paying
increase
them
reading
based on
achievement,
that.
say
Right.
iReady reading.
Sure.
Okay.
That a contract would tie us to utilizing the product at the iteration that they say is needed in order to produce the results. And then if we meet those usage targets and those performance targets are met, then
It's a good use of money.
then we pay out the contract at whatever the negotiated rate is. If our performance data comes in higher, then maybe we pre-negotiated a different rate to pay. If it comes in lower, then we've negotiated a different rate to pay. But if we don't meet our obligation relative to performance-based contracts, let's say our usage rate falls short of what's in the contract, then most likely it will default to whatever they would be getting as if we were using it and getting the results. Currently, when we buy product, we don't tie any of those performance metrics in to those products. We want to move to a posture that really ties the district to certain usage requirements and the product to performance. So then we're only using and paying for things that actually work for our kids. So in utilizing Simone's analogy about frozen yogurt, a lot of times we stack things on top of things on top of things, and we don't necessarily know what is working, what combination of things are working, and would we get better results if we reduce 2 out of the 3 things and just use one thing most effectively and with greater fidelity. So that's what we're trying to get at with this process. We're really trying to streamline what products we're using, not just in teaching, learning, and leading, but pretty much across the entire scope of the district. So every business entity has multiple products that they're using. The idea behind this process is for us to actually get a 360-degree view of how effective these products have been for us in now aligning to our new strategic plan and the KPIs around the new strategic plan. We believe that this is the right time to do it because as we launch the strategic plan moving into next year, because now we'll have baseline data, we now know that we'll have a process for evaluating all those products and only using the things that we know are getting us to our goals. Does that help?
Yes. So if we're focusing on the lowest quartile and we buy this program and we want to make sure that they're moving so many points up, that this is just reaffirming that data is actually happening and we're actually seeing the movement and we're paying for the movement.
We're paying for the movement.
Gotcha. Okay, next
And
question.
I would just add to it that, if you have 20 programs focused on literacy and then you get a result on literacy, it's nearly impossible to say which of those 20 worked and which of those didn't, especially from the district level. But having this distributed approach where we got the list of those 20 and an understanding of how they're working and then asked principals, hey, tell me which of these 20 you're actually using. Then you could actually go in and say, these principals are using this data. They say it's really working for them. Let's look at those classroom or school data rather than district overall. And now we can get a real sense of which, I always talk about another analogy. I use lasagna as my example of school budgets, but you take it out of the oven and something tastes bad or gives you food poisoning. Can you identify which ingredient that is? And the way to do that is having the full understanding from usage all the way to outcomes. And so this is kind of building the system of getting that understanding.
And so you asked principals what they thought was most effective?
Yes. We asked them, we gave them the list. So in that 20 literacy, which is not a real number, I'm just making it up, but we gave them, here's the 20 literacy initiatives that based on our understanding from what we collected from central office may be happening at your school. Which of these are you actually implementing? Yes or no question first. And then if yes, on a Likert scale of 1 to 5, how effective is it? And then on a Likert scale of 1 to 4, how important is it? And we separate those two things because something could be not work, like that gets at the right idea, wrong execution versus this just isn't a priority for us. So we try to understand, is it right idea, wrong execution when we have low effectiveness scores? Or is it wrong idea, like this is ineffective because I just don't think we should be doing it? And then we ask principals, open-ended, do you have any other comments you want to provide? And what we start to see there is there's trends emerging around what types of programs principals feel most passionately that they add comments on, which also gives a nuanced sense of what are the things that principals feel really strongly about.
Principals don't tend to use the programs. They don't see it hands-on like somebody who's in the classroom does or somebody who pushes in. And I think that would give a complete different perspective on effectiveness. Because sometimes it looks really great and it works good, but the kids are just not engaged or it doesn't seem to hold their attention at all.
Yeah.
Or it needs a lot of extra things like say headphones and microphones.
Yes.
So those are things that we believe should be aggregated within the response of that principal. That principal should be aware of the predominant instructional practices relative to a program and usage within their building. If they are not, then those are things that obviously we need to make sure that we address through better training. We could get into a very granular space with the amount of initiatives that we currently have, if we get down to the teacher level, when we've got 365 different initiatives across the district, we will probably never make heads or tails of that data. We wouldn't know really how to parse, how to parse all that out at this point. Down the line, when we get to a much more streamlined subset of initiatives that we're using in schools for lowest 25%, or what we're doing for science, then we may be able to do that comparison of apples to apples for teacher usage here and teacher usage here, when we know that there's clear alignment and clear understanding on how to utilize those materials.
We also did task principals with, hey, if you don't know the answer, don't just answer. If
Right.
you don't know the answer, ask your department leader, your assistant principal, your teacher. Like, don't answer for the sake of filling out the question. Either skip it if you truly don't know, but also you can use your staff to help you kind of answer these set of questions. Yeah.
So this is really baseline data that you're collecting, because clearly, I guess to Board Member Bronson's point, we would need to actually have comparative data, not just an opinion about what the principals are thinking to see whether or not these programs are working. So I'm assuming that you're just collecting categories to collect the baseline, and I'm assuming we will learn how you're going to
Yeah, so
take the next step.
principal's feedback is one
Just one data point.
Yeah. But in the absence, and we'll get to this, what we learn in many districts and in Osceola is that when you have a lot of initiatives, it's really hard to track every single one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And without any information, then we end up just rinse and repeating every year and expecting different results.
Yeah.
And or we just add more and we don't know what's leading to results. So the principal feedback is like one piece to kind of help fill in some of the pieces of the puzzle that might not be actively tracked right now.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, this is a baseline, and the information's only as good as it's being used. And so we'll talk at the end of this conversation about how the district is moving forward to kind of fill in a lot of the beyond perception data on these programs, like usage, like outcomes, how they're building the system to actually track the programs and then make decisions on them. Yeah. All right, so I have a couple of like SDOC specific data slides. I'll move really quickly through them because really you all know these things, but enrollment here is increasing at the same time student needs are increasing. That's like the big takeaway. And performance is increasing. So there's good things happening here. How do we figure out what are the things that are tasting delicious in the frozen yogurt that are leading to those outcomes, and how do we continue those and maximize them? All right, and per pupil spending is increasing, but that will look different once ESSER funding we're at the end of ESSER funding. So obviously this year, per pupil funding will not stay the same growth rate that it has over the last few. All right, so now let's jump into like the real meat of this, which is the findings and opportunities and decision-making process moving forward. Now, I share some limitations to our data because I don't want to, ground us in inaccurate information. So I just want to make sure we all kind of understand what we're really looking at here. As I said, we use that distributed approach. Our team works really hard with department leaders to try to make sure that the list is accurate and comprehensive. But, when you're getting 36 different departments information, we know that there may be things that are missing from the list. So important moving forward to think about how are we keeping this list updated and continuing to add to it as new things get added. Some departments, we didn't get comprehensive cost data on every single initiative, so we'll show you like the overarching cost numbers that we got, but know that if we got this on every initiative, it probably would look a little bit higher. Survey response bias. So what we mean by this is, as you said, principals might not know everything that's happening. They might not know the effectiveness, or they might only see their limited piece of what they're implementing. So they might have a program that they only see one component of, and they're providing feedback based on that one component. But as a district, we use it for a lot more. And so there might be bias in some of the responses from principals on overinflating or underinflating effectiveness based on their own understanding of the program. Changing state standards, just like as we worked with department leaders to identify outcomes for different initiatives, we know that there's always changing what is like the state standards around graduation rates evolve, or state assessments. And then finally, there's embedded departments and initiatives. So sometimes things fall as a part of many other things, and so in some departments, they included the big initiative, and others, they included every little initiative. And so that might make things look heavier on one department and lighter on another department. All right, so as an executive summary, just what are the key takeaways here from the inventory? There are over 350 initiatives happening in SDOC, which account for over $100 million in ongoing, so annual time, people, and dollars. This is a lot of initiatives to be doing at the same time, to be doing effectively. Most of these initiatives, a vast majority of them, tie to the new strategic plan. But there are some priorities and key performance indicators that have a really high number of initiatives tied to them, 50 plus. And there's others that have few to no initiatives tied directly to them. This is a product of a few different things. One, you have a new plan, so obviously some things look, align differently. This is also, you have a very cross-functional strategic plan, which is a really beautiful thing about your plan. But that means that sometimes something might align to more than one, but we identified one for the purpose of the findings exercise. In the inventory itself, we can identify more than one, but what we're sharing with you is one. So sometimes there might be things that align with more than one rather than one. Most of the initiatives, about 70%, were department leaders reported that they were not designed to support a specific group of students, but rather all students. That might be all third graders, that might be all elementary students, that might be all students at Kissimmee Middle School, or that might be, all staff members or not really student focused. But about 70% of your initiatives weren't targeted towards a specific population, and then about 30%, 1 in every 3, were designated towards a specific population, like students with a disability or English learners. Your leaders were able to identify, for a majority of the initiatives that they listed, they were able to identify a clear objective. So if we think about that, what works for which students at what cost? We talked about at what cost, $100 million. For which students? A lot of the initiatives are for all students. But what works? We asked them to tell us, what's the objective of this? And then how do you measure that objective? And for a majority of initiatives, folks are able to say really clearly what the objective is. And they were actually also able to say, how do I measure that objective? But fewer than 1 in 3 initiatives, so less than 30% of initiatives, actually were actively monitored. So saying not just how do we measure it, but do I measure it and do I have results? And then principals shared mixed feedback on initiatives, but generally reported higher effectiveness for things like technology initiatives or operational initiatives than academic or engagement programs. Now, just from my work in a lot of other districts, this is very typical, and honestly, it's from my perspective, it's a good thing, because if technology or operations are the things that principals are identifying as high needs, then that means that kind of the Maslow's hierarchy isn't being met, and we can't even focus on instructional or engagement if we're not warm, safe, dry. So your principals were saying, yes, we're warm, safe, dry, we have good technology. Now we're able to focus and provide really thoughtful feedback on academics and engagement. And principals are supplementing central office initiatives with their own family and community engagement programs. Basically, all of this is to say that the district can be, more effective and more efficient. But they need to really find a decision-making process that uses the inventory, principal feedback, like usage data, that kind of combines all these things together to make decisions around how do we move forward with our programs. And that's what we're gonna end today talking about, is what's the path forward from here. So I'll go through some of the data for that executive summary. This slide is really just the same summary, so I'm gonna skip it and move to the 3 questions we tried to answer in our review of your inventory. So we asked about strategic alignment. Are initiatives aligned to the district strategy and to target student populations? Or your student grounded in that some of your needs are growing? Are you having initiatives that are tied to those needs? Impact, are we able to measure impact for initiatives and which are most effective? So this is a combination of principal feedback and what we were able to actually gather in data. And then how much do initiatives cost? Those are the 3 grounding questions. So starting with strategic alignment. So your new strategic plan, as you all know, has those 5 priority areas. What you see on this chart here, this bar chart, is that about half of the initiatives, or a little less than half of the initiatives, 40%, were aligned to the achievement priority area. This is pretty expected. You would expect and hope to have the largest number of initiatives tied to the biggest outcomes that you're striving for in your strategic plan. And then next is engagement. Alignment, culture, and community only has 10 initiatives, and then there were 5 that were not aligned to any of them. That doesn't mean they're good or bad. That just means that they're not directly tied to one of these 5 priority areas.
And is that because they hadn't been identified as one, or they don't fall into any of
They
those
just didn't fall
categories?
into any of those categories. So how we did this is we asked department leaders first to look at the list of key performance indicators and say, which of these do you feel this is most tied to? But our team, to be, so that it's not 36 different perceptions or more than that probably, our team went through and said, okay, do we find a clear alignment between this program and this key performance indicator and priority area? So those 5 are ones that just, for a lot of them might be, kind of outside of the scope of the strategic plan. That doesn't mean they're good or bad. It just means that they're not necessarily tied directly. Now, went too far. We put 2 slides in here. So the first one, and it's good that they're on top and bottom, perfect, so you can see the connection. So the top slide here is your set of key performance indicators, just because the language was too long for us to include them both on the same slide. So you can see for each of those key performance indicators in those priority areas on the next slide, how many initiatives were tied to that key performance indicator, and then the average out of 5 principal effectiveness score of those initiatives. Now, the most important thing to take away here is the ones that are highlighted in yellow and purple. So the ones that are highlighted in yellow, these are the 3 key performance indicators with 50 or more initiatives tied to them. One of those is increasing outcomes for students. We would want to have a higher number of initiatives tied to that one. One of them is around college and career readiness. There's 50 initiatives tied to that. Now the question there is 50 too many, too few? That's a judgment call, but how do we measure which of those 50 are really working? And then there were 88 professional learning ones. Now, just to be clear, professional learning includes conferences and memberships, so that makes up about 30 of those initiatives, and then other professional learning programming is the other 58 of those. So those are the 3 highlighted in yellow, and then there's the ones highlighted in purple, which had 0 or 1 initiative that was most directly and most acutely tied to. So again, our team went through and assigned these, but you have a very cross-functional strategic plan. So there are probably some of those 0s and 1s that have initiatives that are tied to other things as well, tied to those, but there's some of those that might need additional time, resources, or focus on, especially as you've adopted this new strategic plan.
Run it back. Okay.
Yes,
Go back to those yellow highlighted ones. There are 3 that you said.
yes.
What were they?
Professional learning is the number 1-5, increasing the percent of teachers participating in professional learning.
Okay.
Achievement 4-1 is improve outcomes on like grades, and it's on the top part of,
Gotcha.
it's like improve outcomes, student outcomes on assessments, state assessments, so you would expect a lot there. And then college and career readiness is 4-4.
I should know this, so have some grace
No.
on me. My brain already goes to college and career readiness.
Yeah.
Where could I get a list of all of the initiatives that are geared towards college and career readiness?
We can provide that too.
I think that's going to be some of the conversation we have after this, because we're not calling out specific initiatives here today, since this is broadcasted and we don't want our vendors to be like, oh, they don't like my program.
Sure.
And so we'll see that with
We-
Dr. Shanoff
Yeah,
moving forward.
yes. The idea is just keep in mind that an initiative is anything above and beyond
Core.
what is core. So, there could be any number of different things that are involved in college and career readiness. Let me give you an example, Decision Day.
Yeah.
Decision Day is an initiative, right? So, we have different things. They may not always be things that we get from vendors. They may be activities that we engage in. They may be people that, that we employ. But yes, don't worry. We will definitely have that conversation.
Yeah, it wasn't just for that, but I'm just thinking.
Yeah.
And then going back to a question that I had originally when you said 356
Yes, that's
initiatives
correct.
are a lot. This is a convoluted question, but
Yeah.
just entertain me for a moment. In the work that you've done in a district our size, what, in your experience, is an effective number of initiatives?
That's a good question. So I have done this specific work in districts of close to your size, and you'll have more than most of those districts. So the average number for a district of your size is somewhere around 250 initiatives.
Half of what we
No,
No, about
$100
About 100 less.
Not quite a third, but
But that isn't to say, that's also, I think one of the things that I've been really impressed with department leaders here is they've been really forthcoming with their initiatives. And what we've found in other districts is people are really nervous to share all of the information because they're afraid that what's happening is getting cut. And Dr. Shanoff has done a really good job of working with saying to department leaders, what we need to know is everything that's happening, or else we can't make good decisions. And so when I say 250, that should be taken with a little asterisk of it might not be inclusive of everything. But when you say 50 college and career readiness, the next step there is saying, okay, let's look at all 50 of those and let's say which ones are really working for us. And which ones are working towards the same exact goals, the same students, the same schools, the same goals, and so they're competing with each other rather than working together. And so how do we like kind of make decisions around those 50 programs together? So the next step is not taking the list of 356 and making decisions on them. It's narrowing to let's look at all of our literacy programs and see how they are working together or competing with each other and make decisions around those.
Thank you.
Great. And so, yes, I said we looked at how they align to the strategic plan. That was that last slide. And then how they align to target student population. So what we did is we asked folks, department leaders, to share who's the intended population that this program or initiative is serving. And then our team cleaned that. So if it was aligned to all students in a specific grade level, a specific school, or just all students, then that's considered no specific target. If it's aligned to, it's something that's really directed at adults or operations, that is not directed at students. So there are things that are directed at adults that are meant to impact students, like professional learning or coaching, that's supporting adults, but it's ultimately with the goal of supporting students. But other things are really focused on the adults. They don't really impact students. And so that's that dark blue. And then in the brighter, lighter blue, you have specific student populations. And this can get one layer more specific than this. We have this is the broader group, and then we have a more specific group. So for example, those 19 students with a disability, there might be some of those that are at mild moderate students, some of those at students who have autism, some of those at students who have a learning disability. There might be some, that 19 might not all be focused on exactly the same students. But about 1 out of every 3 of your programs is tied to a specific student population. We talked today about how this is probably actually appropriate, because if we think about, and you all come from education, so usually when I'm talking about MTSS, I'm having to explain it, but if you think about the triangle of MTSS, tier 1 is 75 to 80% of your students, and about 66% of your programs are kind of in that tier 1 category. Now you have a growing population, English learners and students with a disability. Those are the next biggest categories. And then you have students requiring intervention, gifted students, vulnerable populations. And then in that yellow, you have students in specific programs. So that's like AVID students or students in this CTE program. So those would be included in that yellow category. Any questions on this piece?
I was worried about what he said. I'm sorry. The 100, comparing us with another county, because we have different needs.
Yes.
Well, that's why I said
how
it's
see
convoluted, but that doesn't mean that we can't compare apples to oranges and still come to some conclusions. If we're the outlier and we have 100 more programs than all other districts that are our size that have similar needs, then that might be something that we need to consider. That's why I prefaced it by saying it's a very complicated, convoluted question. But if we were to take a look at that, I'm sure if we did look at other districts that are our size, I'm sure we could find some comparable districts with our similar needs where they may or may not have as many programs as we have. I just wanted to frame that for analysis later.
Yeah, and even so we've done this work with districts of many different sizes, and I just pulled, because I kind of thought this question would come up. So I pulled a series of districts, their size and their number. I have not worked with a district that's had less than 225 initiatives. So even districts that are, 10,000 students or smaller still have 200 plus initiatives. So the spread is not based on a per pupil amount. And then I have seen in districts a little bit bigger than yours, around 350. I saw that in one other district as well. But the sweet spot seems to be somewhere around that 250. But again, that's not necessarily, it's not good or bad, it's convoluted. There's a lot of reasons to have more or less. But the sweet spot that I have seen in other districts seems to be right around that 250 mark.
Is this a sweet spot at the end of the program or before?
That is the sweet spot of baseline, but usually districts are using this process to not just get rid, but also add, and just better, like if you think about this slide here, better create alignment around what you would expect. So most districts, when they're done with this work, they end with maybe a similar number, maybe a few less, maybe a few more, but a different makeup of programs.
So better alignment.
Yes. All right, so we talked about why the principal survey is not the best way of measuring impact, but I do want to just highlight what we heard from principals. So on this slide here, you have we categorized in the survey programs by category so that principals would be answering all questions around literacy together so that they could ask their assistant principal or literacy coach or someone to help them if they needed support on that. And so you have the count of initiatives that were in that category. So there were 10 categories, the count of initiatives and the average effectiveness. Now, some of these were pretty bifurcated. So you might see a 3.5, but you might have had half of your initiatives below a 2 and half of your initiatives above a 4. You might have a 3.5 because everything was right around a 3.5. But what you see here is the highest ranked or the highest effectiveness is at the top. Principals tended to report technology initiatives as highly effective. And the lowest effectiveness which was kind of the outlier of the group, was family and community engagement, which was only 4 initiatives, so a small number. But I also said earlier that principals are reported adding or supplementing with other family and community engagement. And we talked a lot today about why this might be and what principals might be seeing from family and community engagement, and that might be a very limited view of what the actual programs are. You don't need to take anything away from this slide except just the general trend here. So you might be saying like, whoa, this is like a million lines, and what does that mean? What's really important from this slide, each line is a program, but what's really important to note is that you have kind of this set of programs that are 4 or above, which is 30% of your programs, the ones highlighted in yellow and green. This means that principals for about 30% of programs feel like they're working. Just like if it's a 4 or above, that means like it's pretty dang good. Now below a 4 means this at the very least needs some improvement. And a majority of your programs fell there. This is what we see in most districts, is that most kind of fall, like a majority of initiatives, principals feel like need some improvement. But what we've seen from districts in our work is that when there's just so many programs, it's hard for principals and their teachers to do everything well. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's the big takeaway here, is there's so many things that principals feel like a majority of them need some improvement. They also were asked how important it is, and a majority of programs principals feel are important. There are a small number, the ones in yellow, where principals were more likely to share that it's not a priority for them. And we talked about this today, when you're making decisions on programming, thinking about things that people don't view as priorities sometimes can be a good starting point to say like, hey, if we change this significantly, there's buy-in already to making changes. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, then let's jump to the measuring impact. So when we talked about the limitations of principal survey measuring impact, but when you're measuring impact in a district, like at the district or data level, you have to have a specific objective for that program, an aligned data source, and then results to date. And then this cost impact matrix is one of the best ways that I've seen districts be able to compare programs to each other that are working on a similar goal and make faster decisions on those programs. So programs that are low cost, low effectiveness, these are ones that, it's kind of noise. You can reduce the total number, but you can mostly ignore them because they're not a big drain on your financial or time resources. Ones that are high impact, low cost, that's the sweet spot. Like that's like where we want everything to live. So think about like keeping those, scaling them up. When you have high cost, low impact programs, that's the biggest drain on your resources. That's like the things that are taking a lot of time and not leading to any changes. So these are the ones to really evaluate, sunset, or fix. And then if you have high cost, high impact, you just can't do all of your programs to be high cost and even if they are high impact. So you have to prioritize between those. In order to plot there on that, you have to know what does impact mean. And so we asked department leaders to tell us what's the point of this program, how do you measure success, and then what results do you have. And the takeaway from this slide is that your department leaders do an exceptional job compared to other districts I've worked with. They do an exceptional job of saying what's the point of this program and being really specific. They don't do a very good job at actually monitoring and keeping results. And so those are like, that's a real challenge there, is connecting. And to be honest, when you have 356 initiatives, it's nearly impossible to monitor all of those. And so how do we prioritize what we monitor? Most important thing to note here is we often see folks for some initiatives, they note inputs as their outcomes. So they say like, oh, how do you know that this professional learning program was successful? Because teachers participated in it or students logged into the program. And that doesn't tell us if we're moving the needle on what matters. So sometimes people put inputs. We're trying to encourage more folks to be monitoring outcomes and impact. And of the data sources that folks listed, about 1 in 3 was an input, and those tended to be more of the kind of professional learning programs that are harder to measure outcomes or impact, but not always those. All right, I'm moving really quickly through the last of this because I want to get to the decision making, but the last piece around cost is that if you're thinking about where to prioritize, where to get the most bang for your buck in terms of programs to evaluate, start with the most expensive ones. So you have about 25 initiatives that cost $1 million or more in time, people, dollars. Wow. And we took the principal effectiveness and the cost and we mapped it here. So you can see kind of where many initiatives fall here. If you're making quick decisions, you can't always just sunset everything that's in the bottom left or bottom right quadrant, but you can say, what are those programs? Do we need to do them? And if we do, how do we make them better? If we don't, how do we do them, or not do them, or do them differently? All right. Sorry, I ran really quickly through the end there. But I want to talk about what you all can do moving forward. So, and the first 2 of these are systems improvements, like developing a better evaluation mindset so that folks are actually tracking results and getting really specific around what challenge is this program or initiative targeted towards. But if that's a student population that is not seeing results, like, hey, we're really stagnant in this group of students, we need more resources or different resources there. Or bottom 25%, we need to have more and different resources there, kind of building that mindset of it's okay to not have everything target everyone. But the third one is the one I want to focus on, which is building and establishing a decision-making process both for new programs and existing programs. So how do you use all of this information to make decisions on your programming? And this should be grounded in the strategic plan, and it should ensure that there's like kind of adequate and appropriate alignment between your programs and what you want to see. So I have included here just a one slide overview of how this worked in another district similar size to yours that took this information and established a really strong decision-making process out of it. What they did is that the inventory is really an input along with data on how students are performing, what are we seeing, where are we seeing impact, all of those things. And teams, which you already have some priority area and department area teams, take all of the programs that are aligned to their set of key performance indicators, take the data that they have, and map the programs that are working on the same things. So those 50 college and career programs, saying which ones are really focused on improving graduation rate, that might be a subset of 10. Let's look at those 10 and let's put them on the cost impact matrix and say which ones are really leading us to results that we should keep, do better, do more of, and which ones are, taking away from the results we're trying to achieve that we should do differently or not at all. And that group, who are the experts in the programming and the data, make a set of recommendations, not decisions. Those two things are different, recommendations and decisions. They make a set of recommendations based on their knowledge of the programming, where they fall in the cost impact matrix, to the cabinet and the superintendent, who make the final set of recommendations to you all. And you all, as the Board of Education, we know there's things that require board approval, a certain dollar amount of new programming, doing things differently. So you all get an update on here's what we're doing differently next year with college and career readiness, and what we expect to see from that, and kind of how we went about making this decision-making process. That's for existing programs, and then the other thing that Dr. Chanoff and team are doing is establishing a process for adding new. We have this new program application form. Don't get lost in the words on the form, but the real outcome of this is, one, it automatically updates your inventory because you spent a lot of time and dollars and resources, like resources of your department leaders building this list. For it to just sit on a shelf is not a good use of the time and the resources that was allocated towards it. So if you have this form directly tied to that inventory, it essentially keeps it alive and says we're going to keep adding to it, and we're going to also remove things from it. Second, it puts the onus on the person who's asking for more and different resources to say what outcome are we going to get. And that's a big change for people, is saying, I'm asking for this program, here's what I know about our data, and here's what I believe is going to change because we're doing this program, and here's why it's different than all the other things that we're doing focused on that outcome. And saying, I know that I'm asking for these dollars, I'm also asking for this time.
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
And on what timeline will they see the results? So it almost puts builds the evaluation before you're even making the investment, which makes it a lot easier to make, decisions on programs when you've already said, what are we going to see on what timeline? And then if you don't, then you're able to say, was this a wrong idea or was this bad execution?
And the idea is that we attach those new program applications, we attach those to board agenda items. So then you see the application that came through the committee process up to your consideration for approval. So you know where it started, you know what was reviewed, you know what the targets are, and it becomes very transparent to everybody why we are asking for approval of this particular new program. I didn't want to cut you off.
No, please, that was that.
So just to let you know, this is the beginning of a process for our team. So even though Sarah Graber and I had the opportunity to review this with Simone and Lucy a couple of weeks ago, today was the first day that our team really got an opportunity to dive into this. We're going to move rather quickly to operationalize our processes, especially around evaluating what currently is in the initiative inventory. That's not a process that needs to happen completely before we engage each of you about what's in there and what's in the inventory. So we'll be doing that kind of simultaneously. The idea behind getting this process done now is because we want to look at what we need to be renewing before we get to the next board meeting for the upcoming school year. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done with our team between now and the June 24th board meeting, when we make decisions to bring forward about what to renew and what not to renew, or what do we need to change? What do we need to adjust? What do we need to downsize? What do we need to increase? Those are all things that that the team is going to work through, and then all the way up through the functional teams that are going to be in place to monitor KPI achievement within our strategic plan. So I like the idea of us having to get into this very, very quickly, because come July 1st, we're in a new fiscal year and we're starting to monitor things, and I want those teams already built out, ready to go. So I think that the timing is right. It just means that June will not be a
chill
month.
June.
Yeah, will not be a chill June for our group. We're going to be working at a pretty frenetic pace, just to make sure that we have everything that we need that is going to align to the work that is most important.
What's KPI?
Key
Key performance
indicator.
indicators.
Ah,
It's what your results
Yeah.
are, like what,
fancy talk.
what the
Basically the
priorities
goal.
are.
I have
It's
one more
3
question.
letters.
Like, okay, so these programs, so
Yeah.
we're looking at, let's just say like Bubble Kids, and we're wanting to get that movement. And so you're looking at, we're tracking the data, and then does it say why these programs aren't being successful? Like, it just say, it's, you have to do like 3 hours of this math
Mhm.
practice, and maybe they're not using it for the 3 hours, so we're not seeing, is that gonna be labeled, like,
So-
as the reason why it's not effective?
That
Do you
is
know what I'm
what
talking
department
That makes
and
sense.
yes,
Okay.
priority area teams are, so if you look at this process here, there are teams that will be looking at a subset of initiatives that are both content experts, but also just leaders that need to understand what are all the things we're investing in this area. So if we have, all of our literacy initiatives and we're looking at them, when we're mapping, there's a team that's doing this middle piece that is mapping them on cost and impact. Cost is mostly in the inventory, maybe a couple, areas they need to add. Impact is sometimes in the inventory, but pretty rarely, as you saw, that 28% have an impact in there. So they're combining principal survey, also usage data, and general literacy data across different buildings and classrooms and grade levels to say, okay, we see movement in these grade levels and we know these programs are the ones that are implemented there based on usage, so those are high impact. And so they're placing them and then saying, all right, here's our 20 literacy programs. These 5 are working well, stay the course, make sure they're continuing, but really we're staying the course. These 10, we're gonna do something different with. We're either gonna have to build a better data system for, or we're gonna have to, restructure our implementation. And then these 5, we've determined they're just not working for us and we're gonna get rid of them. And it's not necessarily 5, 10, 5. That's like, it could be 20, 0. It could be, 15, 3s, 2. It could be any combination of those, but saying we took those 20, we looked at all of the information available to us, usage, outcomes, principal feedback, what's in the inventory, and we made a set of decisions on how we're gonna move forward.
I think you did a great job.
Thank you.
I really do. This was like very effective.
Thank you.
I feel like I learned something.
I'm
I
glad.
Thank you.
I'm glad.
It does seem, and this is more of a note for superintendent and team, once you adopt this new process, monitoring will be important, of course, but also the implementation, because if we are renewing contracts on performance and we are not accountable for implementing correctly, then that could definitely skew data.
Mhm.
So just a note there.
Totally
I
agree.
think part of that goes to, I think it's important to connect this because Paula asked the question out loud. Part of that is teacher feedback too. Right now we have principal feedback. And we all know working in a school that can be skewed heavily I think if we're going to make decisions on what programs to keep, which programs to get rid of, which programs to expand on, we need the people that are in the trenches that are doing the work to actually give us that feedback. Because at one school, they may not be using a program and it looks like, oh, this is crap here. But at another school, we have teachers that are like, this is actually better than the program that the district may want us to be doing. And we're seeing more effectiveness. That's going to be skewed if we don't get the feedback from people that are doing the work. I think that's important. And I know the timeline is now crunched because we're talking about June, but I don't know that we can make $1 million decisions without having the feedback from the people that are actually doing the implementation, not just overseeing the implementation at the schools.
Well, not everything comes up for renewal also. Just
Not everything comes up for renewal, and I think that there's a few things. Yes, we do need to get the input of our teachers. I'm not dismissing that we don't need to get the input from our teachers. What I'm saying is that in order for us to even get to a point where we can get the input of teachers, we have got to scale down. We currently have things that are still paid for out of ESSER, that there is no operational dollars assigned to for next year because they've only been paid for out of ESSER funds. These are things that we have already determined have not brought about gains for our students. If we know that we're not getting results, I think that those are things that we need not go ahead and just take a flyer using operational dollars just to wait to see whether or not we're going to get certain input back from certain populations when we already know that it hasn't been used, or it hasn't been used effectively, or it has been used and we haven't gotten the results. So I think that there already is data that we have that we're going to have to make some decisions before June 30, because quite honestly, we don't have the money. So, and we got to make payroll. So we're going to have to make some decisions between now and the end of the month around some of these things that we already know are not necessarily bringing us the results, and the usage data just isn't there. And I don't want to ask teachers for perceptions on data or on tools that they don't use, because we can get into a very slippery slope if we're asking people for data about programs that they don't use. So I think we need to figure out what they're using before we ask them for input on the effectiveness of those tools. Otherwise, it could be, well, I heard that program isn't that good, so I'm going to rate it down here. Same thing for principals. Principals will do the same thing. I think it has to be part of the process that we build out. We are going to have to make some decisions, though, going into next year. I don't think anybody's looking to take anything away that has been proven to be effective. So and we know that we have some very effective tools because we have the data to show that there are effective tools that our teachers are using. We don't want to get rid of those at all. What we want to do, though, is we want to get rid of the things that, quite honestly, aren't moving outcomes, are not necessarily research-based, that teachers are not using, but we continue to pay for year after year after year. We got to 356 initiatives, not because they're not good at inception, but because we never retired many of them over time. And I think that that's the process that we're trying to go through between now and June 30, is really look at what do we have and what do we know is kind of laying dormant that we know we shouldn't be carrying. So there is some weight that we need to shed off of what we have. But moving forward, our process does have to be a little bit more inclusive and get that buy-in and get that input from those that are working on the front lines. I just would rather ask them 10 questions and not 1,000 questions.
Good? All right, this workshop is
Thanks a lot.
adjourned.
Inclusive.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.